Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you and welcome everyone to Introduction to Xamarin.Forms Shell. I'm Chris Miller. I'm a software architect for Tyler Technologies. Uh, I can be reached on the usual social media things. Twitter as Another Lab. I blog at rajapet.com. I'm on GitHub as Another Lab. And a lot of what we're going to be seeing today will be taken from my course that's on Pluralsight using Xamarin.Forms Shell. So let's begin. All right. Thank you all for donating. If you haven't donated yet, here is the QR code. Just aim your mobile device at it and scan it in. I'd like to take a chance to thank our sponsors. Without this, we couldn't be putting this on today. We also have links for speaker and event feedback. Also, scan your phone at each one. And I'm not sure where to get to them after we get to the slide, but I'm sure they're going to be on the site somewhere else. So, what is Shell? It's a new way of declaring page navigation within Xamarin.Forms. It was introduced in Xamarin.Forms 4.0 last year. It's open source as part of Xamarin.Forms and lives in GitHub. This is really handy because you can report issues and you can join in on the conversation for new features. It uses a hierarchical layout to lay out your pages, which makes it real easy to set up your page navigation. It provides a mechanism for URI navigation to go from one page to another. And it has a built-in search handler to make searching from lists to detail pages very easy. So why Shell? Well, there was a need to be able to quickly define page hierarchy for an application. They've always had the master detail template, but was not enough. You can do a lot with it, but it takes a lot to get there. Also, Shell was designed around the fast rendering system that's now part of Xamarin.Forms. It's designed to go faster and take up less resources. So what makes up Shell? Well, we start off with a simple container called Shell, and in it you can have an optional flyout menu, also known as the hamburger menu. You can have top tabs. You can have bottom tabs. You have shell content, which are the actual pages that will go into the tabs. And you can have menu items. So here's a sample flyout menu for a made-up application. It has 3 sections. Each section can be customized. We have a header section at the top, which you can use for branding. The middle section, which is the item pages. And then the bottom section, which is used for menu items. So the flyout header is typically used for branding and displaying information. What your app is, your version number, and so forth. And you would use XAML to define the layout and the controls used. Here's a sample flyout header. You can see it's just a grid, and it has, sorry, I went a little too fast. Let's go back. It has a grid and just a couple of controls on it. We have an image, and then we overlay some text on it. Anything you can do in XAML, you can pretty much put in your header. The middle section is your shell item template, and that controls the display of your pages to be navigated. There are bindable properties for icon and title, and this is usually defined in the XAML. So what we have here is a sample shell item template. The first column defines the look of the icon. The second defines the look of the text. And this is where you have all the room for stylizing anything you want to make your menu look. If you're supporting a right-to-left language like Arabic or Hebrew, the layout will not be localized. The menu will come in from the right side of the screen instead of the left side, but the icons will still be on the left of the text. If you need to swap the columns for left to right support, there's a couple of ways of handling this. You can set the column width and the grid column attributes in code, or you could data bind them to a view model that checks the flow direction at runtime. And here is sample data template to define the pages that are navigated when the user selects an item. So for each page, you have a title, you have a flight icon, and you have the content template. Using a data template, the page is not instantiated until the first time it's called. This allows the shell to start up quickly. Here's a slight variation. We're using flyout display options set to as multiple items. And when you do that, your pages are grouped together. So in the hamburger menu, there'll be a top and vertical bar above it and below it. and then they'll be displayed with bottom tabs to indicate which page. Here's your first page and your second page. When you when you place multiple shell content classes inside a tab class, you get top tabs, where each title would be the name of the tab, and when you click on each tab, will go to each individual page. When you have multiple tabs, you're creating bottom tabs, and these will appear at the bottom of the page. And this is how to do both top and bottom tabs. The controls defined by the tab class will be the bottom tabs. The controls defined by the shell content class will be the top tabs that appear inside each of the bottom tabs. The shell menu template is very similar to the shell item template. There's just a slight difference for the name and the binding properties for both the icon and the text. So here, instead of binding to fly to icon, we bind to icon. And our text is bound to the text property. With the menu item, you can use an on-click event to define the action for the menu selection, or you can use data binding, and bind a command to the item. Routes are registered. Let's talk a little bit about URI navigation. Routes are registered in the shell template and via the register route method. You chain the routes to form a navigation hierarchy. The same page can appear on multiple routes, but the URI must be a unique path. And the URIs usually have three components. You have the route path, the page, and then a query parameter. So here's an example. Whack route, whack page, question mark, some parameter equals some value. This makes implementing a search feature very easy. So to actually implement the search, the UI support is built in. We just need to subclass the search handler class. And within the search handler class, we override the onQuery changed and the onItem selected events. So inside the search handler class, in onQuery changed, it gets passed a value that the user typed in. And in our code, we will set item sources to an enumerable T list of the items that match the search criteria. When you exit onQuery change, Shell will display a selection list that uses that item source list. When you click on an item from that selection list, onItem selected will be fired. This allows you to take the selection and call a page with that information. So here's a sample onQuery changed event from a search handler class. It gets passed in the value that the user typed in as new value. First thing I like to do is check to make sure that they haven't typed in spaces or null characters or anything non-printable. If it's not null, if it's null or white space, we set item sources to null and then we just return back out. Otherwise, I usually convert it to lowercase because I usually do case insensitive searches. And then I just get a reference to my data store. And then I'm just going to do a search on that data store. And I'm just going to compare house type and address to whatever the user passes in. And that will come back with an enumerable list that gets passed to item sources. And we get a selection list. And if the user clicks on anything in the selection list, onItem selected gets fired. Excuse me. So the first thing we do is we set item source to null because we're done with the list. We don't need it anymore. For iOS and Xamarin.Forms, we have to implement a delay as a workaround. There is a bug. It's still we're now at version 4.7 of Shell, and it's still there. Without this little delay, the item selected event will just fire so quickly, nothing will happen. And then what we do is we use the URI navigation and call go to sync from the shell and go to /houses/house ID, and we're passing in the ID value of the house that we found. And before we get into how we process that, I'll show you how you add the search handler to the page. It comes with Shell, and you just add the search handler class, and Shell will build in the UI for you. So right above the content, you would put in shell.searchhandler, and then namespace your search handler, and then you can just set placeholder to whatever text you want to appear in the search field. Set show results to true, I've never been able to figure out what that does, but you do need that in there. And display member name. That will be the field that actually gets displayed in the search list. You can customize it. So if you add in a item template, you now have a data template, and then you can just define what you want to appear in the search list. So in this case, for each row, we're going to have a grid. We're going to have an image bound to it, and we're going to have the address field. Now I can show you how we handle the query parameter. We use the query parameter attribute to bind the parameter to the view. I'm sorry, the query property attribute to bind the parameter to the view. And then we add a setter method to the parameter to load up an instance of the view model. So, attribute, we're saying ID is going to match to ID. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that value, search our data store, and come back with a matching house model. Once we find that, I have a method in my view model where I can pass in the house, and it'll come back with the view model, and we set that to our binding context. And that's all we need to do. So now we're going to do a couple quick demos. And let me bring up my quick version of it. All right, so what we have here is our app shell. And we're going to create a series of menu items in the hamburger menu to show the different ways you can do the layout. We're going to have a couple single pages right here. We'll do that as multiple item. We'll do the top tabs, and we'll do the bottom tabs. And then finally, top and bottom. So I'm going to bring this up on Android. Take a quick moment while Xamarin.Forms initializes. Okay, so we have our app. Comes up to a page. The only content is actually literally the word page 1. And here's our navigation menu. So we have a single page. Click another page, it goes to page 2. We have our grouped pages. Page 1 and page 2 again, just different versions of it. To do top tabs, here are our tabs right here. And that would go match up to these guys right here. Do bottom tabs. And let's scroll this up a little bit. So we have our browse and our about. And then each one has a different page on there. And finally, we're going to mix and match top and bottom. So we have activity and pages. Will just show up at the bottom. And then inside each one, we have a shell content with items and about, and 1 and 2. So we go to pages, 1 and 2. Does anyone have any questions about how the hamburger menu layout works? All right, we'll jump into our second demo, which will be how the URI navigation works. It's a little more involved. And okay, so we're going to start off with a menu. It's going to have our house. It's going to have houses, about, and agents. And for change of pace, we'll bring it up on the iPhone. I'll show you how the app works, and then we can dive a little bit into the code. Okay, so here we have a list of houses, and we have a search field. And we can search by house type or, I believe, address. So I'm going to search on CR. And you can see it instantly populated the list. We have the picture, and we have the name. So if we click on any one of them, it just jumps right to it. And we can go back. Works the same way as if you'd actually clicked on one of these fields. Search on Cape Cods and go to a different house. And let's move that out of the way. So we have our search handler. And let's put a breakpoint on that to show you how that works. Come on, there we go. And you can see our new value is C. And we can just step through it. Get into my data store, get my items list, and it will come back with probably a few items. Actually, I did there. Let's kill this breakpoint or we'll never get this thing done. And hit cancel. And in our house detail page, here's our attribute. Put a breakpoint right here. Let's type in. Boom. So we're in here, ID. So the value of ID is 2, which represents the ID of the house that we're looking for. And we just step down. And we found a matching house. And then we just jump into our view model. And off we go. All right, that pretty much sums up Shell. Usually we have a few more questions at a time. Does anyone have any questions right now?
Hi, Krish. I cannot see any question being published. If it is getting published, I'll forward it to you.
All right. I was hoping there'd be more interaction. How many people are attending right now?
Sorry, Krish, that I cannot check from here because it is a live event. It is being streamed at multiple places, multiple websites.
Okay, gotcha. Understood. Yeah, this session's usually more interactive. All right. I guess we can keep it open for a few minutes in case someone has a question. I'd be happy to answer anything regarding Shell or what we did here.
Sure, sure.
All right. I did have extra material prepared in case there were no questions, so let's just keep on going. So when would you use Shell? If your app uses a standard layout where you basically have multiple pages, whether it's a toolbar at the bottom, top, flyout menu, Shell has all that for you. It makes it really easy. If you're doing a new development, like a new Xamarin.Forms app, using Shell is probably the easiest way to get up quickly. In fact, going forward, that will be the default template. And more importantly, if you want the app to have the same look and feel on Android and iOS, Yeah, Shell makes that real easy. They handle everything for you for that. And there is a way to add some style. You're not limited to what comes in the basic templates. You can add your own little styling. We saw that you have customizable templates for the flyout header, for the shell, the menu, and the search results. You can control the fonts, you can control the colors, the layout, all of that stuff. You can even go deeper under the hood and use custom renderers. If there was something you wanted to show up in that menu and it's just not supported, you can override it and put in your own. Hopefully you wouldn't have to do that because it just becomes more work to support. But it's available to you right out of the box. Also, the font icon support that was added in Xamarin.Forms 4 makes it really easy to add scalable icons. So all the images in your flyout menus, instead of having to have different bitmaps for different sizes, you can just use the icon fonts and you just have one. There are multiple sources for icon fonts. I like the ones from material design icons. Font Awesome is also really good. If you have a lot of your own vector images and you have a design department, you can actually create your own font and put everything in there, and you have one simple resource. And that way they scale, and you can color them, and it just makes things much easier. And there's also a NuGet package, Xamarin.Forms Visual Material, that will make the iOS renderers look a little more like Android's material design. And now we're back to questions.